Hey, Destin Johnson here. I'm going to walk you through this song you just heard called Tokyo Dream using Sensory Percussion. So this particular song, the inspiration came from a sound pack that was already in Sensory Percussion. It's from Electro Melodic, and it's called Subaqueous. It's a cool pack because a lot of the textures are very almost staccato, and it's going between like this marimba bell sound between Tom 1 and Tom 2. So for like instance, Tom 1, a lot of reverb on them. Actually, for this particular pack, I did some tweaks in here. For this reverb pack, I did tonal reverb up a little bit more than usual, and I added a little bit more distortion. But for Tom 1, for instance, the bell marimba sound is a little bit more verbed out, rather than like Tom 2 sound. It's a little bit more muted for this one. And I'm just playing between those two sounds, just kind of like creating like a texture, some type of composition for that. And the cool thing about those two sounds, and what I like to do with the toms when it comes to like mesh heads, is tighten up the heads more and increase the sensitivity. So when you're actually playing a little bit faster, you get these buzz rolls. Very much like inspired by like trap beats or like a hip hop style texture for that. And also, as far as the toms go, it's in a sequencer, so it's cycling through different notes in a sequencer. Same thing with Tom 2. And as you get from the center to the edge, or vice versa, edge to center, the texture changes. More reverb, the harder you hit, the louder the sound would be. And on the rim, it's just cool, like it reminds you of like a bell. Same thing for the floor tom too. Cycling through different notes. As you can see right here. Same concept of all these notes, like all the melodic textures are cycling through a pattern. As far as the floor tom, I added a couple one-shot samples here just to give like a different style vibe. I have like a taiko drum on the rim tip of the floor tom. Very like super wide, like war sounding drum. And I have the velocity set to that guy pretty high. There are different ways to do this, but for a particular way I've been doing for quite some time is increasing the velocity to a point where, for me, if I hit it hard enough, the sample will open up. Some people use like timbre controls, velocity controls, but for this particular composition, I wanted to use this velocity. With that concept, I have a couple different samples doing the same thing. Like for the floor tom, if I'm hitting super hard, you'll hear a vocal chant. And that's just a simple sampler, nothing crazy going on with that guy. And this will be on the center of the drum, that vocal chant. I have another vocal chant on Tom 1. And I actually like how the bell sounds are playing with the vocal chant. And then all together would be. And then obviously right here is the kick drum, which is like this single super boomy bass note. A lot of attack on this one. It's kind of like the foundation of this particular tune. As far as the snare, again, all these sounds can be found within the sound pack, which is super cool. It's very grimy. If I go to this section, you can actually see it. So it's compiled of the grimy snare 2012 and the Oscar tin hat. So it actually, when you go from the edge to the center, it actually gets a little bit more dense. So it kind of starts off muted a little bit more with the hi-hat. The intensity increases once you get towards the center of the snare. So that's pretty much the bare bones and like the direction of the samples and how they're programmed. The song is broken up to 3 different parts: section A, B, and C. So section A, I'm running some samples in the background with Ableton, which is like creating it's like setting the scene of like this cool vocal phone audio with like some firecracks. And then while I'm doing that, I'm with my MIDI controller playing around with some reverbs and overdrives and establishing that. But when section A kicks in for the actual Sensory Percussion part of the song, I'm just playing kind of what it feels right. I wanted this song to feel like kind of like a score. So that's section A, and section B has the groove, which is like more tribal trap hybrid. And really utilizing the buzz rolls to give like a different type of vibe. So that's section B with like the trap feel. And then going into C, I kind of slow down the tempo. For this section, I introduce this like space bell. You can see it right here. Again, regular sampler, drag and drop in. And this one, the reverb is kind of cranked. And then this is the section right here. What's cool about Sensory Percussion, they're honestly giving you a cool, foundation to build around like what you want to play. And this pack came with Sensory Percussion. I just added like, tweaks here and there, like as far as distortion or reverb, and the song came about. Yeah, as far as Sensory Percussion, I feel like the form factor felt super natural to use as opposed to use like an MPD. So usually I'm using an MPD to program samples and create different grooves how I see fit. But with Sensory Percussion, I felt like I was more so not being a programmer, but more so like a drummer. Like how would drummers approach this particular song when the sounds are already programmed onto the drums? And I felt like that was a kind of like seamless transition. You try different things that you probably wouldn't try, which is like a regular beat machine or an MPD. So it just felt way more natural just to kind of like experiment and you know, come up with different grooves and ideas that you probably couldn't do with just like, you know, a couple pads here and there. And with this new version of Sensory Percussion, there's so many cool features that have been added to the software that I'm really enjoying. When it comes to like, you know, the macros and like the hit controllers and the different new features of this software, I feel like it has greatly, immensely improved my workflow, how I approach a tune. For the Evans Portal, since it is an audio interface, you can actually use a, you know, different instrument or plug up different external instruments to it. I usually use like a mic if I'm like talking or conversing with something like a live stream or a live show. If I want to be able to talk, I can use that input as well. Or if you wanted to use guitar to like, you know, send audio through the interface and like use that audio to go through Sensory Percussion, you can do that. Going from Ableton to Sensory Percussion, a lot of Ableton users can be confident the fact that the softwares are so similar and sometimes feel like one program. But yeah, so going from like producer mode and like using the skills that I have for, you know, curating a song or, you know, conjuring up an idea, was very seamless to go from producer to like a drummer because it just felt more natural. You applying what you would hear in like a song and just like express that with the drums, and sometimes different ideas will come out for what you're playing rather than like, you know, focusing on an MPD. You actually become like producer, arranger, and a drummer all three in one at some points because you're just curating something live.